Good morning.
Good morning.
I have got a terrible confession. Sin, I don't like it, but it likes me. And that's just the simple truth. I hate it, but yet at the same time, I think every one of us probably can say the exact same thing, that we don't like sin, but yet we still mess up. We still make mistakes. We still miss the mark. In fact, the idea of sinning isn't that you're totally missing the mark. It's just being off just enough to not be good. And the thing is that sin is something that's really not talked a lot about within some churches, and other churches, they beat on it too much, it seems like, because the reality is that we all face it, we all struggle with it, and not everybody struggles with the same sin. Everybody struggles with different ones. Back years and years ago, of course, they talked about the 7 deadly sins, and the funny thing is, I can't even list all of them, so I had to write them down. And of course, those are gluttony, greed, lust, sloth, wrath, envy, and pride. The truth of the matter is whenever you look at any one of them, they are all related to each other in a way, if you think about it. Pride goes along with greed rather well, it seems like to me. Wrath goes along with envy, I guess you could say. A lot of these actually kind of play into each other. And the idea is basically they all kind of describe an attitude that's unloving, is what it really comes down to. Because a person who's unloving is a person who's prideful. A person that's unloving is a person who envies. A person who is unloving, obviously, wrath would go very much with that. If I look back over my time period in my life, here I am, I'm in my early 40s, and I can recognize there are different time periods where different sins, I guess you could say, were the ones I struggled with the most. And I'm sure we all can relate to that in some shape, way, or form. The problem is that the Apostle Paul, he talks about the idea of there being the old man within ourselves, that we have tried and we do what we can, but yet in us still remains that old man. And the Christian idea of sanctification, the idea of what it is that God considers us pure the moment we take hold of Christ, but that we are always working closer and closer to be what He really desires within us. The idea of becoming more like Christ. The early Christians used the word theosis, to become more like God. And so it's one of those things where we're not there, but we're getting there. I always kind of like to use the idea of sweet tea. My wife makes fantastic sweet tea. If you ever come into my house, the sweet tea pitcher is empty. It's because it's done been drunk. If it's not me, it's the kids. Oh my goodness. My kids won't even drink soda pop. Soda pop's terrible. Mom's tea, though, it's great. The thing with sweet tea, the sweet tea she makes, it takes time. It's still sweet tea the moment she pours the water in and puts the sugar in and begins to put in the little packs. It's already tea, but it's not necessarily good tea. And so that's what it is like for us as Christians in the life that we live. We're becoming better. We're just not there yet. And so today what we're going to talk about is really kind of how I don't want to say fight against sin, but to how to help ourselves in that battle that we all have to wage every day of our lives. The truth is, the moment we wake up in the morning, we need to put our foot down and decide. The moment our foot touches the floor from the bed in the morning, we decide what kind of day we're going to have. And we have to do our best to make sure we have that day. And so today we're going to be talking about how to battle against sin. And I want to go to the book of Matthew chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9. Now, of the 4 Gospels, whenever I was younger, Matthew was actually probably my favorite Gospel to read. Matthew himself, he actually wrote kind of more so for the Jewish people, really. He wrote from a very Jewish perspective. And so whenever you read it, you get an idea of the taste of the law, more so sometimes than some of the other ones. And it's a fantastic book for that reason. It gives you a lot more of the historical, I guess, relevancy and relating it to the Old Testament. So it kind of helps to tie things together a lot of times. The book of Matthew chapter 9. We're going to stop at Matthew chapter 9, verse 1. It says, Jesus stepped into a boat, crossed over, and came to his own town. Some men brought him a paralyzed man lying on the mat. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the man, "Take heart, son, your sins are forgiven." At this, some of the teachers of the law said to themselves, "This fellow is blaspheming." Knowing their thoughts, Jesus said, "Why do you entertain evil thoughts in your hearts? Which is easier to say, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up and walk'? But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sin." So he said to the paralyzed man, "Get up, take your mat, and go home." Then the man got up and went home. When the crowd saw this, they were filled with awe, and they praised God who had given such authority to man. What's interesting about this, first and foremost, is that whenever they bring this man who is paralyzed to Christ, Christ doesn't speak to the paralysis. He speaks to the condition of the heart of the man. And the importance of that is this. A lot of people realize that in this world, this life, things don't go our way a lot. There are frustrations. There are terrible events that happen in people's lives. There are things that just aren't right. And God isn't speaking to those things because, most importantly, He's speaking to people's hearts. Because out of all of those things, oftentimes they are rooted in a darkened heart. If He fixes the person's heart, He will fix those problems. And so that's where Christ is speaking. Because, consider it like this. Let's just say in imaginary land, there's rioting and looting in big cities. Like I said, in imaginary land, of course. And let's say in imaginary land, this rioting and looting is taking place and people are getting hurt. Not just everyday citizens, but a lot of people. Let's say if there's people getting shot, which in imaginary land is happening. Let's say if people are getting killed in imaginary land, that is happening. Let's say businesses are burning down and homes are being broken into and people are drugged into the street and beaten and just terrible things are happening, which in imaginary land is happening. No matter what the political ideology behind it, those are true events. If a person's willing to do those type of things in the first place, what is their heart like in the first place? If Christ can fix that heart, those events, those actions don't take place. Because that's where the real problem lies. It's not in the looting. It's not in the murdering. It's not in the harm. It is not in the rioting. It is not in any of those things. It's in the heart of the people who are doing it. And so when Christ speaks to the heart, He's speaking to the real issues of the world today. And so that's where Christ's battleground lies. Whenever we think about these people, we don't need to think about these people in imaginary land, of course, as being the enemy. We need to think about them as people who need help. People who need Christ. Their hearts have got to change. And the truth is, they're just like us. Every day of their lives, they struggle with sin and temptation. The problem is that we want to overcome those things. We want to get our heart better. We recognize that it's sick and that it can be better. But a lot of people out there don't recognize that simple truth. They don't see what they're doing as being evil because their hearts have been hardened to what is really happening around them. Now, if you read the story, He speaks to the man's heart. And of course, he's accused of being a blasphemer. And he's saying, who is it that can forgive people? That's not something that man can do. And of course, in verse 4 it says, knowing their hearts, Jesus Christ said, why do you entertain such evil thoughts in your hearts? Once again, speaking to the heart. Which is easier to say, your sins are forgiven, or to say, get up and walk? And we'll stop right there. Well, what is the answer to that question? It's easier to forgive sin or to make a man who can't walk, walk. Truth is, neither one. But when you're God, both are easy. Both are simple. For us as humans, we can't walk up to a paralyzed man and heal him and have him walk. We can't go to a person and forgive them for a sin against God. We can forgive them against a sin against ourselves, but we can't forgive them a sin against God. But Christ could do both. And to confirm it, He then makes the man whole once more. But what's amazing and oftentimes overlooked, He's not just talking about physically whole, He's talking about wholeness of heart as well. There's a lot of people in this world, their hearts have holes in them. And there's a lot of people in this world, and I knew I grew up with a good young man. Whenever he was younger, he kept trying to jam things into that hole in his heart to fill that missing spot. And he tried to put things or events or a lifestyle or different types of stuff into that heart to fill that hole. The problem with that hole in his heart, it was a God-shaped hole. So no matter what he put there, it wasn't enough. He could put fast cars. He could put big trucks. He could put hard music. He could put great television. He could put video games. He could put whatever he wanted in that hole, but it's never enough because the hole is a God-shaped hole. And therefore, nothing will fill it except for God. I remember when I was a little kid, one of my favorite toys was one of those little blue and red plastic ball things that you have the little shapes and you slide them through the holes. I loved it. It was a great time. And one of the things I loved to try to figure out is which ones could you sometimes cheat through the other hole. Which ones could you actually make go through the wrong hole. And most of the time you couldn't. Once in a while you could maybe get some of the pieces to go. But the truth is that the right thing goes in the right hole. And the problem is today people are in that situation where they're putting things in their heart that isn't what fills that hole. It's a fantastic story. Let's read on. Verse 9 says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, what does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, Jesus said, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. And we will stop right there. One of the first lines I want to focus on is actually the very last line. It says, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. He's not coming for the righteous. He's coming for the sinners. And you have to realize something. By God's standards, who is actually righteous? No one. By God's standards, when he says, I'm coming for sinners, he means he's coming for all of us. And it's a fantastic testament to who he really is, because sinners are the ones who recognize that they're walking away from him. A lot of people who call themselves righteous don't even see it. But he's saying all of those who are walking from me are who I am looking for. The ones who think they're cursed, the ones who think they're going to hell, those are the ones I'm coming to save. And the thing is, whenever he calls, it is vital for us to answer that call. When we hear conviction upon our heart, act upon it. Because there are things in our life that God, kind of like an onion, he'll peel back things. And as he gets through the various layers, we'll realize that some of the stuff that we are doing, maybe it's not necessarily a wrong or a sin, but it's something that maybe is tempting us to go towards sin. And so therefore, we have to answer the call to get rid of it, to drive it from our lives. Now, what's also interesting here is this. This particular meal that he is having with Matthew, you have to realize who Matthew is. He's a tax collector. No one likes tax collectors. To this very day, it's still the same. No one likes tax collectors. It's just the way it is. The thing is, of course, in their time period, tax collectors, like for instance, here in the United States, a little different. We understand, we pay our taxes that help provide for the things that are needed. For instance, roadways, schools, things like that. In their time period, though, this is different. In their time period, tax collectors, today, as I said, we understand. We don't like taxes, but we understand what they're about. Back then, though, tax collectors were a reminder that they weren't a free nation, that they were under Roman rule. And tax collectors weren't collecting taxes for the local school to teach your children. They weren't collecting taxes for keeping Route 185 a good road. They were collecting taxes to send to Caesar, some fella in another nation halfway across Europe. That's what they were doing. So tax collectors were considered traitors to their own nation. But secondly, they were hated by so many people because most tax collectors in that time period were crooks. It's just the way it was. But what you find, though, is this. The people who associate with a tax collector are the outcasts. The ones who in their society were also outcasts because of being in a similar line of work, or maybe they'd helped the Romans one time a little too much. And so everybody cast them out of their local congregation or what have you. And so these people were rejected by the leaders. So who does Christ go to? He goes to them. That's who he's eating dinner with. And what's amazing is this. Most of these people were probably excluded from their local, I guess it'd be their Jewish synagogue. Most of them would have been driven out from that because they were loyal mostly to Rome. But what would have happened, though, is these people, this is the first time they ever heard Christ teach. This is an opportunity to reach people who need him. And so he takes that opportunity. But there's another thing I want to point out, and that is this. The most important thing here. It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. The church is not a courtroom. The church is a hospital. The church is not a courtroom. The church is a hospital. And that means a lot for us as Christians, because the truth is, the closer we get to God, the more we realize that we have our own hearts to fix. The closer we come to him, the more things we see that we can work on for ourselves. And so it is vital for us, because I got to tell you the truth, I'm the chief of all sinners. I should know better than doing half the things that I do. But yet, lo and behold, there will be a week where I'm going along and all of a sudden I'm thinking to myself, I've not done anything too terrible for about the last 3-4 days, and bam, as soon as I can get that thought, within 20 minutes, I've already done something stupid again. It's just how it is. 9 times out of 10 in my case, it's usually a text I get from the wife saying the kids are being crazy, and out comes that particular one, wrath. And I'm wrathful. And we've all been there. It's just the truth. We'll all look back and say, I'm thinking I'm doing pretty good. Maybe it's not 20 minutes, maybe it's 5 minutes. Let's be honest, it's 5. And the truth is, maybe it wasn't good for 2 or 3 days. Maybe it was really good for 20 minutes. And we know, it's the truth. But I am so glad that the church is a hospital and not a courtroom, because that's where we all belong. It doesn't matter how lost of a person you've come across, they belong here. They belong here. And that's the truth. And that is a truth we have to commit to our hearts, because there is not a single person on the face of this earth that you have ever met that Christ didn't die for on that cross. Not a single one. You can look back over history and you can think of some of the most terrible people that you have ever heard of in history. And I'm going to tell you the truth, Christ still died for that person on the cross. Still died for them. The funny thing about history is this. It's, of course, written by the victors. And if you look in history, we're always told who the worst people are. And in the last 100 years, we're told specifically people in World War II were some of the worst. But if you go back further in history, you'll find out that what they did was small compared to other atrocities that we never hear about. And to be honest, I think if I remember correctly, and my numbers could be wrong, the events of World War II, and this is kind of getting off the sidetrack, the events of World War II that took place in Germany were inspired by events out of Turkey about 50 years before. But no one talks about it because, little known fact, it happened against Christians. And that's what a gentleman in Europe, who I won't name, actually based what he did off of. And it's one of those things that everyone forgets about that. And this last week, a very, very terrible thing happened. I don't know if you heard this on the news, but the Hagia Sophia, which is one of the oldest churches in all of Christendom, which was built prior to Islam ever having risen in the Middle East, prior to the birth of Muhammad or any of that. This church was built, and it was a Byzantine church. It was beautiful. This last week in Turkey, their president decided to declare it was a museum. They decided to declare it as a mosque. And they're now going through and taking out and removing all the Christian artwork, painting over murals that have been there for hundreds, well, to be honest, at this point, over 1,000 years, and destroying it. And what had happened was this historical landsite, this great marvel, had stood as a church. Eventually it was turned into a mosque. But then eventually, after a little while, they realized, hey, this is still a church, and they made a museum open to everyone. And now they're closing it once more, and they're turning it back into a mosque. And it's a heartbreaking thing. But there's a lot of heartbreaking things in the world. And that's why Christ speaks to hearts. That's why God wants to change what's in here. If He changes what's in here, He'll change what's out here. So that's what we have to pray for. We have to pray for the hearts of our leaders, the hearts of those who are out there in this world doing terrible things. We have to pray for the hearts of the ones who are making decisions, to guide them, to help them to make the right decisions. But most importantly, we have to start with our own hearts, because I can't go 20 minutes without being stupid. And that's just the simple truth. And we're all there. 5 minutes, I'm sorry. I can't go 5 minutes without being dumb. It's just the truth. So, in conclusion, as we go throughout this week, I'd mentioned earlier about the 7 deadly sins. What's interesting about them is that they hardly ever talk about the simple fact that there are 7 deadly sins, but there are also 7 virtues to counteract them. They hardly ever mention it. I mean, one of the reasons why is because, you can make a lot of good movies based off of 7 sins, but 7 virtues, that's a terrible movie if you ever want to watch it. But here are the 7 virtues. And so these things I want to encourage you to consider and to focus on instead. They are, and I had to write them down because, once again, I don't even know the 7 sins. 7 virtues, I can probably think of them, but definitely write them down for a reason. Chastity, temperance, charity, diligence, so hardworking, patience, gratitude, and humility. And if I was to sum all those words into one, love. Love your neighbor as yourself. And that is the prayer we all should pray for so many in this world who need help, is that they would love and not hate.